You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and we thank you for joining us today. I'm Daniel Davis, your host. And I'll tell you, we've got a fascinating show ahead for you today. For those of you out there who have you sometimes just kind of sit there in your chair and think to yourself, how come I can't ever get the things that I want in life? How come I'm not in a better position? Do you ever feel yourself with that self-loathing? Why can't I ever demand more of myself? Well, sometimes it isn't so much that we don't demand more of ourselves or that we don't have goals. It's just that sometimes we'll write those goals down and we just don't find ourselves achieving them. That passion doesn't seem to be there. So in the billion-dollar industry, simply known as self-help, we go running out to the nearest library or the nearest bookstore and we try to find that one single book that'll change everything for us. 7 Steps to Greater Success. 10 secrets to why you can achieve optimum results in just 5 to 10 minutes. Quick and easy, fast and well done is everything that we've ever heard, but still we find ourselves sitting in that chair and going, well, here I am in the same place that I was before. I remember a Buddhist maxim that simply goes like this: you are what you believe. And I remember that it was some time ago that I finally realized, it really is that simple, but the question is, how do you kind of change and get that switch to work in your favor, where you can sort of demand what you want and see it happen? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is our guest who's going to be talking about such an approach that we would definitely call results-oriented. Quick and easy, I don't know so much about that, but what I do know is it does create results. He is the originator of a program simply known as PSYCH-K. And joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is Robert Williams, and he is the originator of this PSYCH-K. And we're going to talk about what this is all about. And Robert, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
My pleasure, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Now, tell us about your background. I see that you had spent 14 years as a professional psychotherapist. Do you still do that now, or?
I don't do it as much as I used to. I kind of miss it, actually. I moved from Denver, Colorado, where I lived for about 35 years and did have an active private practice for about 10 or 15 of those years, I guess. Moved to a small community in south central Colorado, which doesn't really sustain a private practice, so I don't get to do much private work anymore. I do miss that, but I was an active participant in private session work for many years in Denver.
Mm-hmm. So basically, your help was, you found your calling, if you will, as being able to get out there and help people make transformation and have better lives for themselves.
Absolutely. Where all this goes is that just because I can't do private sessions doesn't mean private sessions aren't being done. As a matter of fact, on the contrary, a lot more private sessions in PSYCH-K are happening not just in the United States but worldwide, because there are a group now of 44 certified instructors teaching PSYCH-K workshops so that people can come and learn how to do this work for themselves, and they're not then dependent upon a private session format. They become their own mechanism or catalyst for change.
Now, here's what's interesting, as I was saying earlier in the program, is that most people, when they go to try to achieve goals or try to transform their lives, they find all these different methods of things such as visualizations, affirmations, willpower, and positive thinking. Write it on a card where you see it every day, you'll begin to move toward that. But then they find that things don't work. So tell us what PSYCH-K is and how it works.
Well, I'll address what you just said because I certainly agree. That had been the case for me for many years as a seeker in my own life, trying to get my life to work the way I wanted it to. And sure enough, affirmations and willpower and positive thinking and visualization were all the things that for about the last 50 years have been what's been offered to us to be able to create changes in our lives. And I found that, as most people, when they get honest with themselves, it works sometimes, but it doesn't work very often. There's a lot of frustration behind the fact that you think, well, the problem is me. I'm doing what the book said. I'm visualizing. I'm pretending that I already have what I want, all that kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is some people, for instance, don't visualize well. I happen to be one of those people, Daniel, so here I am reading books on how to visualize. I close my eyes and my screen goes dark. I don't see anything. So I had to look other places to find out what was going on and why there seems to be this gap between what we want. In fact, I put it this way, there's a huge gap between how smart people are and how their lives actually look.
Right, exactly.
I think we've read the books and we've done the visualizations, we've done listening to the masters on the planet tell us how to change our lives, but the fact is there seems to be a big gap between our wisdom and our lives. So I investigated that personally because I took it personally. Why doesn't my life look as smart as I actually am?
Exactly.
So it turns out I was looking in the wrong place, and I think that's the problem most people are having. They're looking at the conscious level of the mind, the part of us that wakes up in the morning, looks around, decides what to do, sets goals, judges results, reads the self-help books, and gets all inspired. But it turns out there's another part of our mind that we didn't know much about until fairly recently, maybe the last 10 years, at least from a neuroscience point of view. And that's the part called the subconscious mind. And that's where PSYCH-K focuses, because it turns out a very interesting fact is that our lives are run 95 to 99% of the time at the subconscious level. You could think of the subconscious as the habitual level of our lives. We habitually get up and do what we've been doing for years over and over and over again, and we do it automatically. That's the nature of a habit. And I found that really those two parts of the mind were not friends. They were not communicating well. My conscious mind wanted something in life, a better job or more money or better health or whatever it was. And my subconscious mind, the keeper of all of the programs and experiences I've ever had, didn't have an update. It didn't have the programs that would support that. So there was kind of a mini war going on between my conscious desires and my subconscious beliefs. That's why PSYCH-K focuses so much on the subconscious, because it's a mechanism for literally updating the software in your life so you can print out a new life.
Now, I'm kind of curious, Robert, is how you actually discovered PSYCH-K. I mean, this here is just, it's so interesting because I've had direct experience with this. Now, just to let the listeners know, this is how the experience was for me. I remember at a point where I was asked, okay, so what do you see as your goal? Let's just say, for instance, with the radio program. And so I kind of broke it down just a little bit. It wasn't like this long, intensive, let's see how many things we can create for why I want this goal. It was just, let's take a look at what your goal looks like and what the facilitator had me do. And I got to tell you, it was really fascinating that that was the first time I actually could feel like it was possible. You know, a lot of people through affirmations, they think that they're starting to believe that they feel that they're moving toward a goal, whatever this goal may be. But that was the first time that I actually felt it inside. I felt like this fire burning. It was really excited. So I'm curious how you discovered PSYCH-K. I mean, this must be an interesting story by itself, because this is really quite an interesting process.
Well, the truth is PSYCH-K discovered me. It really wasn't the other way around.
Okay.
I was doing just like you, and many people for many years have been trying to find a way to improve their lives, to step out of the ordinary into the extraordinary, to lead a life that's exemplary in many ways, and to find a joy in life. I mean, let's face it, that's really why we're here, but so many people are chasing joy and can't find it anywhere and don't know why, and yet it's all around us, but it's a matter of your perceptions and your beliefs. So I was doing what most all of the listeners have been doing, is seeking some way to break through to that level of joy in my life that I thought existed, but I had never really experienced. And so I studied a lot of things, and in the studying of all these different methods of change and so on, every one of them had some truth to it. Every one of them had some value. It was never that it was a wasted sort of thing. It's just that none of them were actually complete for me. They always left something to be desired. And so, truth of the matter is, it was in a moment of abject frustration, not a centered spiritual experience, but just plain frustration. I'd been trying so many things for so long, and I write about this in my book about PSYCH-K because I think people have a right to know how this came about. And I wish I could say I was, in deep meditation in a spiritual place, but I wasn't. I was ranting and raving at the time.
That's usually where the best discoveries come from, is the ranting and raving.
That's right. I was doing the ranting and raving meditation. And complaining, and I literally got angry because I had made several mistakes on a flyer I was putting together for workshops I was doing at the time, not PSYCH-K. And so I got really angry because I'd messed up two or three times and was chastising myself. And I got really angry. I went outside and I sat down in a chair and I clenched my fists and closed my eyes and I said, "Okay, God, if you don't want me to do this, what do you want me to do?" It wasn't really a question. It was an accusation. And lo and behold, I don't know what it was. I think I just went into a completely different space about then. But anyway, within probably 30 seconds to a minute, I would guess, all of a sudden something started to happen to me that never happened before in my life. and that was I could see pictures in my head of instructions about these patterns that have become PSYCH-K. All of a sudden, there'd be, I'd call them cosmic downloads, started to happen. And I really got my attention because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't visualize easily, and so all of a sudden I can see this like a scroll. I mean, it's like paper you could see. So I ran back in the house and very curious about all this and started typing what was in my head. And lo and behold, the very first pattern that is part of PSYCH-K, it's taught in the second level of PSYCH-K, the advanced course called a core belief balance, which is very involved. I mean, it's 13 paired statements, all the instructions for how to do it and all that. I've never seen any of this stuff before. So there it is in my head. Now I've got it typed into a computer, and then the picture disappears. I've never been able to get the picture back. So when you say, how did I find PSYCH-K? Well, I was just in a state of frustration. It found me. And then over the course of a couple, 2 or 3 months in 1988 and 89, I received the rest of the information in full context, and I just put it together. I was stunned by all of this. It was a real amazing thing to me, and I didn't know where the information came from. I didn't know if it was valuable. I didn't know if I had just sort of thought it up or something, although nothing like that had happened before. So I very cautiously began to explore what was on these sheets and began to have people help facilitate the processes with me. I thought if any harm was going to come to anybody, it should come to me first. Right. But it turns out on the contrary, not only did no harm come, but extraordinary things began to happen in my own life, and then I began to share it with willing guinea pigs, friends, and others. And eventually, probably about 6 months to a year into this exploration, I began to integrate it into my private practice, Daniel. And for the first time in years, I watched people change right before my very eyes. Much like you described, for the first time, you're not thinking about having a feeling. You actually have a feeling. It's almost this burning sensation or this deep knowing inside you that you are different. So I finally came to the conclusion, because I was really a skeptical guy in those days about anything, including what I was given, that there's something good here, very good here, and that it was my responsibility to shepherd this. I don't really take ownership, claim for it, because I didn't invent PSYCH-K. I think I was sort of the original conduit for it. Maybe that's about all I can really claim. And that I've been very meticulous about making sure that the work stayed as it was given to me, and as I've certified instructors to teach it around the world, that method and that process and that original understanding has been transferred to them. So when you take a PSYCH-K class, you're going to get the original recipe, the original intention.
Now, for those of you just joining us, we're talking with Robert Williams, and he is the originator of a process simply known as PSYCH-K. Now, Robert, it was interesting because some time ago we had a guest on our program as we were talking about the one thing people would love to see happen in their lives, and that is to acquire wealth. To be able to make more money or become rich, if you will. And her book that we had talked about was actually quite simple. It was one of the most interesting ones when it came to setting the stage for acquiring or becoming wealthy, if that's what your goal truly is. And within her book was embedded the messages simply that you need to change your beliefs about what you feel you deserve. And for instance, she shared a story about how she was doing all the affirmations and setting the goals and reaffirming and affirming and going over and over and over again, and like you said, visualization and so forth. And it came to a point that here she was with all this positive thinking about, I see myself wealthy with all this money. And her daughter had asked her, well, can I have some money for a new dress for a dance? And apparently she kind of flipped out, like, where do you think money comes from? And so there's the key, is even though on a conscious level you're doing all these exercises, as a lot of these other books would probably tout, that once it was put to the test, the real core beliefs spewed it out that you don't deserve or you don't like money, for instance. And that's something that's at a deeper level. So what I'd like you to talk with our listeners about is, what is the difference between how the conscious mind works and how the subconscious mind works, and how PSYCH-K is effective at sort of bridging whatever the gap there is between the two?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And something you said really triggered an important thing I just want to mention, and that is that the whole idea of money and people wanting to acquire wealth and being such a popular goal, if you really ask the person, why do you want the money? In other words, what's going to happen when you get the money? What's the point of the money? They always say, well, then I can be happy because then I can do this, I can do this, I can have this, and all of that. I've really come to a place where a deep understanding of my own life that happiness doesn't come from things. It doesn't come from money. Things come from happiness. And happiness is a state of mind, not a state of affairs. The beauty about PSYCH-K, and this ties into your question about the conscious and subconscious, is that once your subconscious mind moves into the experience of happiness and joy in your life, you become an attractor factor for anything, including money, but also love, also companionship, also the real joys of life. And a lot of times we get confused and think that the most important things in life are things, and they're not. The most important things aren't things at all. Mm-hmm. Really what people want is a sense of security, a sense of love, a sense of importance, a sense of being valued, and to value other people. And they use money as a conduit for that. So what I've learned over the years is that people often know what they want, they seldom know what they need. Right. And therein lies the discrepancy, the difference between, at the conscious mind, we're seeking money, we're seeking some sort of power, we're seeking some kind of thing that ultimately is going to get us to a feeling, and that's really what we want. Money can't keep you warm except if you burn it. It's not really good to eat, so it can't feed you. It's lousy shelter. It's just all that we think we're going to turn it into those things, and once we have all those things, then we'll be happy. And I say with PSYCH-K, cut to the chase. Go directly to happiness. And then if money is part of your world that will support that, it will come in the most magical of ways. And it won't require effort and strain, and it won't require any of that stuff. But if you don't get to a place where you're happy with yourself, and that's what you were alluding to earlier, that this woman didn't really like money, which I would say she wasn't deserving of it inside herself. Her subconscious mind didn't have programs that says she deserves it. Well, then you're not going to have it. The law of attraction is also the law of repulsion. Mm-hmm. So with respect to the conscious mind, that's the part of this that sets the goals. That's the part that wants stuff. That's the part that reads the self-help books, gets all excited, thinks all of your friends should read the same book because you've been now filled with inspiration. Unfortunately, your subconscious mind was probably digesting the dinner you just ate after you when you start reading your book. It does the rudimentary functional things to keep us alive. It's an amazing part of us, and out of our conscious awareness, it runs all of our biological functions and needs. It also is the habitual part of our mind, not the volitional part, not the one that chooses to do things differently, but chooses to just reproduce what we already know. That's why it's so frustrating for some people to change a habit of thinking or behaving, because consciously they want to change, but subconsciously there's an old program that keeps them from doing it. Right. So it's roughly equivalent, Daniel, to staring at your computer and printing out a document. You look at it come out your printer, not out of your computer, and you look at that and you go, this is wrong. So you start yelling at your printer. Printer's not the problem. The software is the problem. So people chastise themselves about their behaviors. They get thinking that they don't have enough willpower. They're not committed enough to their goals. They just don't believe in it, and all of that stuff. And none of that is true. Mm-hmm. It turns out 99% of the time, the reason you don't have what you want is because you don't have the subconscious programs that facilitate and support you getting what you want. So here you are working real hard towards getting something and working much harder, actually, at the subconscious level at not getting what you want. Let me give you an example. The listeners that maybe can relate to these numbers. The conscious mind is a powerful instrument in our evolution and in our consciousness, but it processes about 40 bits of information per second. When you compare that to the new data in neuroscience about the power of the subconscious mind, which processes 40 million bits of information in that same second, and you pit those two parts of your mind against each other, which one do you think is going to win?
That's pretty obvious.
It's obvious. And so if you don't make your subconscious mind your best friend, it will be your worst enemy. And what PSYCH-K does is gives you direct access to the subconscious, gives you the latest understanding of how it works, how to speak to it, how to communicate with it directly. And literally, it's like upgrading your personal software to align with your desires, which are conscious desires 99% of the time, so that you can move into having what you want. I think a more interesting question than getting what you want, personally, is deciding what's worth wanting. Because people are still wanting things that aren't going to get them what they ultimately want, which is happiness, joy, a sense of peace of being in their own skin, a feeling of being loved. Those are the essential things in life that people really want. And all these other things, they think, a new place to work, a new house to live in, a new spouse, a new bank account, somehow all that's going to translate into happiness. And the beauty of all of this is you don't have to wait till all those things are there. You can go directly to happiness by having belief systems to support being happy now.
Mm-hmm. And being happy, too, ultimately leads to feeling passionate about being alive, and therefore you're going to have that passion as a direct energy source toward moving into a life that's definitely, supposedly, authentically yours. Now, I remember as I was starting off the show here that some time ago I was just thinking to myself, okay, it is that easy, that if you could just tap into the subconscious mind and you can maybe change your belief systems, whatever they are, those beliefs that are kind of sitting there right into the core level of who you are, that'd be great. But, how do you do it? Well, as I had said before, as I had tried PSYCH-K, I found, this is quite an effective process. So how did you create the process of PSYCH-K, and what is that process?
Well, as I mentioned, the processes themselves were actually given to me in these series of downloads in 1988 and 89. PSYCH-K is experiencing its 20th birthday, actually, this year in 2008. So it's not the newest thing on the scene and brand new and just arrived yesterday. This has 20 years of proven experience of changing people's lives, and so that's why I still do it. If it ever stops working, I'll walk away from it. But as long as people's lives continue to get better and better, my own included, and especially my own, because just like each one of us, we're concerned about our own world. PSYCH-K has transformed my life miraculously, I think, in many, many ways, and I continue to be blessed with this gift, and that's why I'm sharing it in this way. So PSYCH-K's patterns, they're called balances. These are the processes of accessing the subconscious and rewriting the software there. They're based on lots of things, some very ancient ideas and some very contemporary. The more contemporary ones have to do with a research field called split brain research or brain dominance theory. It's the notion we have a left and a right hemisphere of the brain. Both hemispheres provide us with different qualities and attributes. The left hemisphere is typically associated with logical, linear thinking, practical application in life, and so on, thinks in words, whereas the right hemisphere is more emotional oriented. It thinks in pictures. It tends to be inclusive instead of exclusive. They're really very different, and both of them are very important. That's the thing. It's not that one hemisphere is more important than the other, but what's really powerful, Daniel, is when you can get them to work together. And much of what PSYCH-K does to make this change possible, where you can change lifelong beliefs in a matter of just a few minutes, is that you can access and activate both hemispheres of the brain at the same time. That's a very simple physiological process, which is built into the system. We're just utilizing. We're riding the wave in the direction it's going. So once you access the hemispheres of the brain and you get them coordinated where the crosstalk between them, the communication is really clear, then what happens is you can introduce a new idea to the subconscious mind quickly and easily, and virtually all the resistance to that, that's stuff you have to overcome when you're using willpower and standing in front of a mirror and saying, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself, and the voice in the mirror is looking back going, no, you don't. Hear all the reasons why you don't. And so rather than have your image be your enemy, why not make it your friend? And you can do that by just saying, look, okay, our parents told us all these things. We got those things. Society's reinforced those limiting beliefs, but the buck stops here. We're changing them, and we're changing them now. Mm-hmm. And so PSYCH-K gives you that chance to interrupt the cycle, no matter how long you've had a belief. Literally, it isn't a little person walking around in your head trying to make your life miserable, although sometimes it feels that way.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
But it's really just an energy field. Your mind's an energy field. There are photons of light held in an electromagnetic field, just like a computer. When you access the field, you change the field. When you change the field, then the new belief becomes just as tenacious, just as automatic, just as habitual as your previous patterns. You're just exchanging not-so-useful habits for brand-new ones based on your current wisdom. You have a right to have a great life. You've right. done your work. It's just getting that information to the subconscious where it can print out automatically.
Mm-hmm. I know one of the most interesting scenes in a movie that I had seen once was starring Jack Lemmon, and it said simply that God is happiest when his children are at play. And you wonder, well, how come so many people aren't playing as much as they used to, because they're not very happy
right.
about how things are going now. What's really neat is that you talk about the fact that you can take a belief that could have been there forever. Like in one of the jokes kind of in talk therapy, I guess, is the fact, tell me about your childhood as though it all started there. Well, some of that probably did, but it's being able to take an old belief, or even many beliefs, as you said. It's like just basically pulling out a floppy disk and inserting a new one. So about how long does it take to do that in this process known as balancing?
Well, the balancing processes can take anywhere. Average time for the change is 2 to 5 minutes. And I say average because sometimes it takes a little longer, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, depends on what has to be processed, and sometimes only maybe 10 seconds, 30 seconds. It's really a function of, think about it for a minute, you're not changing a belief consciously, so you're not working with the 40-bit processor. Right. You're working with the 40 million-bit processor each second 40 million bits of information is processed. So as long as you don't have to go back in your mind, as traditional therapy, I was trained that way, by the way, to go back in time and piece all the experiences together and figure out who was to blame and who's to be forgiven and all of that, and you had to know all the sources of everything consciously, and then it was the notion was that the sheer insight of knowing how all this began and how it happened and stuff would somehow change it. Well, graduate school taught me that at the University of Colorado. The truth of the matter is it gave people insight, but it seldom netted them the actual changes they wanted. That's where I understood the power of the subconscious. So if in effect the subconscious knows everything about you because it was there when everything happened, including the installation of the original beliefs that you want to change. So when you task it through the subconscious process that you're using with PSYCH-K, essentially you give it the information you want it to change, and it goes off and does it at high speed, much higher speed than you could consciously process anyway. Once the changes are made, then it becomes obvious because, like you said in your experience, you have this for the first time an actual feeling inside you, your kinesthetic response. The body says, look, something's different here. I'm having a different experience I've never had, and I've been working with this belief for quite a while. So that's how you know.
Now, since you were someone who worked in psychotherapy, I'm sure that you've probably worked with people who had addictions, drugs, alcohol, whatever the case is. How has that been? How has PSYCH-K worked for people such as those who have those addictions?
Addictions are really interesting to work with because they, depending on what the substance is or what the perception is, there are different forms of addictions. Most of them are chemical addictions, but we'll stick with those for right now. As an example, they're actually all quite different, not the same. If it's addiction like a recreational drug, generally speaking, the recreational drugs are associated with a way for you to relax, or a way for you to essentially screen out the rest of the world for a while and get a little peace of mind instead of running full speed. So people will use the drugs to alter their state of consciousness because their day-to-day state of consciousness is not one that they want to be in. So the PSYCH-K approach would be not to get rid of the addiction, because it'll go away naturally when you have a perception that says, I enjoy my life. I am in this life, and I enjoy being in this life. I enjoy who I am, and I enjoy all that life has to offer. If you're escaping life all the time, you're going to need some drug or some sort of obsession or compulsion to get you out of it. So the real issue is you don't go so much for getting rid of the addiction. You go for filling the life with some meaning. And as soon as it's filled with meaning, the addiction goes away.
I know, it's just interesting because I was thinking of an old Jacques Cousteau documentary which was called Amazon Snowstorm in the Jungle, and it was about the cocaine trade. And here were these people, they actually have this severe process for helping people get off cocaine where they actually would take out what they call the pleasure center of the brain, believing that that would actually curb or actually abstain their addiction for wanting to use cocaine. Now, what was interesting about this is that as they said in the group, and these were people after this surgery, you can see them twitching with nervous fingers because they wanted to get back to the cocaine. So even removing that area of the brain, which, now you don't really have any emotions, but still it wasn't effective toward getting them away from wanting to have that. And so I could see where if you instill a different way of living through a belief change, that would naturally just fall away. And you've seen pretty successful results with people, and how lasting have they been?
They've been remarkable, because once you inject joy into life, then you're not looking for a joy rush. Life is a joy rush. It's like, I'm already there. What's the point for in taking the jug? That's the whole idea, is to have a life that's filled with joy instead of having pills that are filled with joy, and it's the only way you can get to joy. So my experience, I'll give you one quick one. I worked with a man that was 28 years old. He grew up in a time when smoking pot was what his whole family did. And he had been smoking since he was 9 years old, and the whole family had the habit. So he's 28 years old. He's working in a body shop, auto repair place in Denver. And he came to me and he just said, I really like the pot, and I like the feeling of the marijuana, and what I like the feeling of is this kind of always being complacent about everything. He says, but now I'm 28 years old and it's getting in my way. I really don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to improve my life. And he said, I need some help. He says, I'm high every day. And he came to me for some help. And so we did one PSYCH-K balance. And in the basic course, this particular balance is taught. Now, I don't remember his specific belief statement, but it was something that, if it were true, then he would have filled the gap that the marijuana was serving in terms of his experience of life. It was serving a purpose. So we met the need, and we did this one balance, and it took him, this was extraordinary. It took about 45 minutes, which is real unusual. But this was only one experience, and he had been doing this since he was 9 years old. And when he was finished, he called me about 2 weeks after the session, and he just said, I don't know what happened, he said, but I haven't had any desire to smoke, and he says, and I'm getting a new job.
That's
that's life-changing stuff, and that's like in one session, and it doesn't always happen in one session, but you know what? It's more the rule than the exception with PSYCH-K compared to the mainstream therapy that I was taught and I was using. Mainstream therapy has its place because it gives people insights into their life. It's not so good at actually making the changes. That's where PSYCH-K really shines. So if you're combining insights with, okay, now we know what we want to change, let's make the changes, rewriting the software of the mind literally will change the printout of your life.
Now, I know that in the book, The Biology of Belief, which was written by Bruce Lipton, is that he talks about how beliefs are stored in the memories of cells. Now, I know that you also collaborated a video called The Biology of Perception and the Psychology of Change. Now, tell us about that, because I think what's interesting about the balancing technique is that it works with what's called muscle testing. Tell us about that collaboration with you and Bruce Lipton, and what that muscle testing and balancing is all about, how that works.
Sure. Well, Bruce and I had known each other for about 18 years, and we met at a conference in the Rocky Mountains. And Bruce was talking about, at that time, the main subject that he covers, which is our lives are influenced by our beliefs and perceptions more than they are our genes. Our genes express themselves according to our perceptions and beliefs, which actually controls our physiology. And, of course, my part of the program was talking about how to change beliefs. So one of the several years that we were at this particular conference, we were the conference people set us up so that Bruce gave his presentation first, and then I gave mine. Bruce and I really didn't know each other. In fact, we had different kinds of schedules during these conferences and didn't know much about each other or what we were presenting. But the interesting thing was when we met was that he gave his presentation, and at the end of the presentation said, do you understand now, the science actually says that your beliefs and perceptions are what control your behaviors and your physiology and tell the cells what to do and create your life. And everybody said, yeah. And then their hands go up and they say, well, Dr. Lipton, how do you change beliefs? And Bruce would say, well, I got to go now. My time's up. he had no clue.
I think I've got the secret, but I'm not going to
buckle down to it.
Uh-huh.
And so I got up on the stage right after that, and he was making his way out of the room, actually, at the time, and he didn't know who I was and what I was going to say, so he was off to someplace else. And all of a sudden I say, well, I really appreciate what Dr. Lipton just said about beliefs, because I can show you how to change those beliefs in just a few minutes. And so before he got to the door, he stopped in his tracks, and he turned around and thought, this guy must be crazy. He's making these outrageous claims. So he did sit down, and he listened to my presentation, and I did a demonstration actually of a PSYCH-K balance with a woman there. It turns out there were about 120 people, and I asked for somebody who would like to make some important change in their life, whatever they chose, and this woman raised her hand, and to make a long story short, she came up on the stage, and she was very timid, and I said, so what exactly would you like to change? What is your concern? And she says, she could hardly speak, and the person that was sitting next to her said, she's afraid of public speaking.
Oh, no.
So there she was with her fear right in front of her, 120 people in a room with cameras going, and she's on stage now. So anyway, I proceeded to facilitate a change process, a balance with her, one of the balances that actually you learn in the basic PSYCH-K course. And this woman had been stymied by this limitation for a great many years, and she was really wanting to make a change, but hadn't been able to. Everything she tried hadn't worked. So turns out we did this balance. It took about 10 minutes to do. And at the end of it, I said, I turned her around to the group, and I said, would you mind telling the group a little bit about that experience? And if this hadn't worked, she wouldn't have been able to speak because she couldn't when she was on the stage. But all of a sudden she steps forward. She hesitates just a minute. I think she was looking for the fear that she usually feels in front of these large crowds. And all of a sudden, she just takes off, Daniel. She starts talking about where she's from and who she is and how this is so different. And I let her go for about 5 minutes. I had to tell her to stop. She was taking up my time. So she was smiling, saying, "This is amazing, this is amazing." So she went and sat down, and then Bruce is a scientist, so he's appropriately skeptical. But it turns out this woman was from Florida, and she came back every year. She came back the next year, and it turns out she had started Toastmasters in her area. Eventually, she hosted a version of the same conference we were doing in the Rocky Mountains in Florida, and she actually became an award-winning public speaker.
My
so it
goodness.
completely changed her life in about 10 minutes. And so that got Bruce's attention. He and I started chatting and said, you're telling a story about how we get to be the way we are, and I can help people change the way they are. I can give them tools to be able to manufacture a life that is based on their wisdom and not on their history. And that's how we got going, and that's how that video came to be, was we did a presentation together combining the story because we thought it was important for people to see the whole picture, literally how you get to be the way you are and how you can change it. So that's what's on the video. It's an introduction to what we do. It's not a substitute for the class because I do a 10-minute demonstration. The basic PSYCH-K class is 2 days long, and it's taught properly by an instructor in an experiential situation, but the video does give you a visual opportunity to see somebody actually change a belief in just a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. It's just really, again, astounding for the listeners out there. We're talking with the originator of PSYCH-K, Robert Williams, and talking about how we tend to live through our beliefs and perceptions. And what's interesting about just that statement alone is the fact that we will tend to move toward those things outside of ourselves that affirm those beliefs inside of ourselves. And that seems to be the folly when you're going after this goal you think you want, but all these roadblocks seem to be getting in the way, and this is a way that you can change all that. Now, what is it about muscle testing when you do the balance that makes it all so effective?
Well, the muscle testing, Daniel, actually is just a communication link. It actually doesn't change beliefs at all, but it's a mechanism, a physiological mechanism for identifying when a psychological change takes place. So you can see muscle testing, you have a physical experience of it. You can't see the belief change, but you can verify that a belief has changed with muscle testing because it turns out the subconscious mind, that's the part we're talking to mostly with PSYCH-K, one of its functions is to control muscle movement. So in order for you to lift your arm or walk or talk or, for that matter, to digest your food, the subconscious mind has to kick into gear. And because it's a massive, very fast processor, it can take care of all your neurological and physiological functions within its processing capacity. Muscle testing is a mechanism. You could think of it as biofeedback within the body. If I put my arm out to my side, parallel to the ground, and somebody else pushes down gently, but my instruction is to keep my arm strong, my arm will remain strong if there are no other intervening variables. I mean, within reason. I'm not talking about arm wrestling here. I'm just talking about testing the strength of one's arm when it's out. So you're pressing fairly lightly, but you can resist the pressure comfortably. It turns out when the subconscious mind is presented with various bits of information, like, for instance, if it thinks of something that it really likes and then it thinks of something it doesn't like, or it says something out loud, you affirm something simple like, my name is Rob, if I'm being muscle tested, and then the pressure is added to the arm. But when my subconscious mind believes what I'm saying, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's true, by the way, but let's say in this case it believes I'm Rob, and it would and it should, then the muscle response will be strong. But if I lie, if I say my name is Daniel, or I say my name is Karen, or I pick another name, and I say it like I really mean it, the subconscious mind will go into conflict because it doesn't have a computer file that's filled with a name of Daniel for Rob or Karen or anybody else. So in that instant, what happens is the signal to the muscle that makes the muscle work is degraded. It's actually reduced significantly. So with the same amount of pressure placed on the arm, or the wrist actually is where you're doing the pressure, the muscle unlocks. I mean, literally it goes weak without any additional pressure because it's in conflict. So it's the signal that keeps the muscle from being stronger. Well, that's a very useful communication tool to be able to test a belief. Your listeners can do this. If they go to the PSYCH-K website, as an example, there's a part of the PSYCH-K site that says test your beliefs. If you learn how to do the muscle testing as we do it in PSYCH-K, and it's shown there, you can test various beliefs in various areas of your life to see if you have self-sabotaging beliefs. Very useful thing to know. And then ultimately, if you discover you do, say in the areas of prosperity or health or relationships or self-esteem, those kinds of day-to-day experiences in life, then you can consider taking a workshop and learn how to actually make the changes.
And that's what's so exciting about the whole thing, because there are people out there that'll spend thousands of dollars on weekend or weekly retreats, coaching retreats, and filling themselves, with volumes of written, I need to do this, and action plans. And to me, that all just seemed too complicated and too time-consuming. And in the end, what you have is a bunch of volumes of things that you wrote, as opposed to just, getting in there and doing it quickly, because as you said earlier in the program, at 40 million bits of information per second, the subconscious mind doesn't want to take all that time to get something done. It's got other things to do, so why not do it effectively? And what I wanted to ask you is that once people have installed, if you will, a new belief pattern or series of belief patterns, do they find themselves ever reverting back to the old ways, or have they just been pretty much eliminated permanently?
I would say that the changes, 99% of the changes are long-lasting, and when they're not, usually this is the glitch, that you've changed the belief to affect a new behavior or a new way of being in the world. So you try out that new way because the beliefs now are there, so you choose to be that way, so you're supported. So now all of a sudden you're changing the way you're thinking and being in the world. Well, you don't live in a vacuum. You live in a world with other people. And so it turns out that most of our behaviors, I don't care how dysfunctional we think they are, actually meet some need. It may be to get attention. It may be to feel important. It may be to feel in control or safe in the world. And these may be very destructive behaviors, but they serve a basic human purpose. So let's say you make a change, and it turns out you try out your new behavior in the world, but somehow it's not satisfying the original goal of the so-called dysfunction. And so that's missing. So in other words, the need isn't getting met with the new behavior. That's when people will go back and literally do the old behavior again to get the need met. And here's the good news about that. If you revert back to an old way of being, your first clue is that there was a need that didn't get met by the original change process, the belief that you installed. So you go back and include that need, because it's usually pretty easy, Daniel, to decide, oh, now what's not being met here? Oh, yeah, I'm not getting the attention I used to get from my spouse when I pretended I was broken and I was in the victim mode. So I want the love, I want the attention, but I don't want to be a victim to get it. So then you can write some new software, literally writing new beliefs, and you learn how to do this in the basic PSYCH-K class, how to create designer beliefs, really, things to design your life quite differently. If you include that need of feeling loved and appreciated and accepted in the new belief, then the need gets met. Then it's long-lasting. Then it doesn't change back. So that's it's called secondary gain in psychology. That's what psychologists call it, which is you were actually benefiting from the old way of being because an important need was getting met. Doesn't mean you're stuck there. It means you can include that need in a new way of being.
It's so encouraging, especially as we speak to our audience beyond 50, the baby boomers and so forth, is the idea that just because you've lived this long the way you have, and deep inside you have the desire to live a different way, doesn't mean that can't happen. And here's an opportunity for people to find out how they can go about doing this by perhaps even attending a PSYCH-K workshop to learn how to do this for themselves. And I think what's exciting about the work that's been created here is the fact that you actually have tools that people can learn to use and actually affect the changes on their own without having to go to these long retreats. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, going out to the woods is always a good time, but something that actually is effective. And I want you to be able to share with people where they can find out more about how they can find out more about PSYCH-K, where they can find out about workshops to perhaps get started.
Certainly, the easiest way is to go to the PSYCH-K website, and that's PSYCH-K.com. So it's PSYCH-K.com. And on that website, you'll have there's an information line, an 800 line if you need to talk to somebody and have some questions. There's a vast amount of information there. There's a list of all the classes that are being taught there are 44 instructors currently worldwide, and soon to have, I guess, 2 or 3 more I just heard that will be in Italy. The classes are taught in Australia, the United States, recently South Africa, Israel. I mean, literally, it's a worldwide phenomenon at this point. People are beginning to take responsibility for their lives, Daniel, and this is what's exciting to me. So if you'll go to PSYCH-K.com, read some information that's there, get understanding, even more understanding than we've been able to convey in this time we've had together, I think you will find that your pilot light's going to come on, folks. I mean, this is the part. I'm 61. I was born in 1946, so I am the baby boomer you're speaking of here. And I have found that with all of this effort of trying to get my life to work and all that, when it finally came down to it, it actually was quite simple and straightforward. But I had to understand and be given, and I think it was a bit of divine intervention, to say the least, for PSYCH-K to be here at this time on the planet when life is moving so quickly and so many changes are taking place for all of us. And coming from our generation of 50 and over, we weren't born into a digital world. We were analog people, and so we've had to build a bridge to the digital world, and we're stepping into digital technology here, which is what PSYCH-K really represents, high-speed forms of change that can deal with the rapid changes we're all experiencing in this world. And I really encourage your listeners to rather than think, oh, that's impossible, it's all too simple and all that, please don't do that. Please let yourself know that your life can work, and life begins now. It's never too late to have a functional childhood.
I like that. Very well said. And you know what's interesting, too, just to let our listeners know, is we've been just basically talking about the basics, but there's also the advanced methods of using PSYCH-K, which perhaps we'll save for another show as we're running out of time here. But, you know, it's just encouraging people, just take a shot. I mean, you've tried everything else. Where's it gotten you? Why not try this? And if it gets you to the same place, well, then you're not any worse off than you were to begin with. And Robert Williams, I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program and sharing the idea of what PSYCH-K is and how it works. I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be thinking, I might want to give this a shot here.
Daniel, it's truly my pleasure, and I want to thank you for the job you do in the world of being a catalyst for change. That if it weren't for you doing what you're doing and getting this message to people who have many times just lost hope, just sort of resolved themselves to living like the poet said, lives of quiet desperation, hoping something will work but not really believing it will. Without you, all that I know could not be conveyed to enough people to make a big difference in the world. So thank you for your contribution.
Well, I very much appreciate those sentiments. Exactly. And again, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back on again, and we'll talk about the advanced methods of PSYCH-K and what that's all about, because just this, if you want to call these basics, is exciting enough, but then to realize, you mean there's more to this? Yes, there is, folks. And again, Robert Williams, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
You bet. And we want to also thank you, the listeners. Again, just go to the website there if you want to find out more about this, and you should, and that is simply psych-k.com, and you can find out what PSYCH-K is all about, maybe the nearest facilitator who can show you how to do this. I'm Daniel Davis. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and go ahead and please, if you want to find out more about our radio program, just go to our website at beyond50radio.com. That is 50 with a 50, beyond50radio.com, and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter where we actually talk about people such as Robert Williams and the like, and you can find out more information there. Again, thank you for joining us today, and remember, live your day past halfway.